Mr. Chairman, you are live.
Thank you, Danielle. All right, committee, welcome to Corporations at Lunch. Barb, if you would call the roll.
Representative Blackburn, Representative Clausen, Representative Clifford, Representative Duncan, Vice Chairman Air, Representative Hunt, Representative McGuire, Representative Roscoe, and Chairman Swanitzer.
Here.
Thank you.
Committee, we have 4 bills today, but I'm not seeing either sponsor of the first 2. So as we await their arrival, let's move to Senate File 142, the Prohibition on Private Funds for Conducting Elections, brought by Senator Steinmetz, who is here. Welcome, Senator, to present Senate File 142. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and don't let me stop you from eating your lunch. So, all right, I bring you a Senate File 142, Prohibition on Private Funds for Conducting Election. This Senate file creates a new section in the general provisions of Title 22 Election Code. As we know, Wyoming elections are known as the gold standard in election integrity. Senate File 142 is designed to keep them that way. In other areas of the United States, especially in battleground and swing states, an unprecedented and coordinated public-private organization funded by hundreds of millions of dollars from high-tech interests and activist organizations influenced the 2020 elections. Private monies dictated city and county election management contrary to both federal law and state election plans, endorsed and developed by state legislatures with authority granted in the United States Constitution. And so that's what this bill is designed to prevent in Wyoming. And so basically all it does is I'm just going to read you the bill really short. On page 1, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the state and each political subdivision or governmental entity that conducts and oversees elections in this state shall not accept or expend private donated funds for registering voters or for preparing for, conducting, or overseeing an election. This subsection shall not apply to the Secretary of State when accepting or expending private funds for the explicit purpose of election training or education, nor shall this section apply to meals or food provided or donated in support of election training or education or provided on election day to poll workers and other election staff. And so basically, and then nothing shall prohibit the expenditure or acceptance of federal funds. So that's the bill. And I'd stand for any questions.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Steinmetz, is the engrossed section, the changes, is it line 3 after election down to line 9? That's my first question.
Senator, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan. Yes, we just, the Secretary of State's office does some election training that they provide lunches and different things for people who come into their office and some education for some students that come into the office, and they might have more information about that as Kai is here in the back of the room. And then we also didn't want to prohibit anything with our election judges. They bring in meals and cookies, and that's a Wyoming tradition. So that was the amendment designed to take care of those 2 areas.
Follow up.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator Steinmetz, do you know, to your knowledge, does any of this currently happen? The issues that you're trying to correct with this bill? Do we know of any occasions currently that's going on with this?
Senator, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, no, we're trying to take preemptive action. This was brought to us by the Secretary of State, and he just wanted to make sure that this never happens in Wyoming, what we've seen in other states.
And could you give me an example, I guess, of what we're talking about? I don't think I have concerns, but I think I'm missing on what has happened in other states that we're trying to prevent before it happens here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So Mark Zuckerberg formed a private corporation that gave out grants to secretaries of states and county clerks in various states, in battleground states. And so they put rules and regulations of when they affect accepted the grants, then they had to conduct their elections in certain ways. And they were in opposition to the state laws that the legislature had passed. And so it caused some election concerns with the last election. And that was something we wanted to make sure that we prevent in Wyoming.
Further questions for Senator Steinmetz at this time? Not seeing any currently. Don't go too far. People here to
Okay.
testify on Senate File
Thank you.
142. I do see our state elections director in the back. I assume he has some comment. If so, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. Kai Schoen from the Secretary of State's office. Our office does support this bill as written. There is no fiscal impact to our office. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
That good, huh? So let me just make sure the foundation or grants that were given to other states, was Wyoming awarded any, or were we solicited to in that regard that was previously mentioned?
Mr. Chairman, excellent question. We were not one of the states that participated in that or received those funds.
And if you know, Mr. Schoen, could you give me a little more on what those funds, was an RFP or was it given out to certain states, or any information you have kind of to elucidate what private funds and what the purpose was, if you know?
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. I don't actually have all the information on what took place with that. And I think as Senator Steinmetz had mentioned, more of a something to put in place should something like that target Wyoming.
Other questions, committee? Let me, Representative Roscoe, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious if any laws have actually been broken in other states that were actually broken, laws that we know of. Thank you.
Mr. Schoen, if you know.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Roscoe, I don't have information on that particular question.
Let me throw you a hypothetical, because I know there was a bill in the other house about moving our primary date up and what that would have affected and who would have paid for it. And there were conversations that maybe political parties should be conducting their own elections in some regards. If we did have in that scenario or in any other scenario in the future of Wyoming, where we say maybe we would do an election on behalf of a political party, if the political party paid for it, would those be considered a private donated fund under this statute if it were to go into effect, in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, thanks also for that question. With regard to that one particular bill, as you mentioned, we did a little bit of looking into that as to what impact there would be, certainly on our statutes, but went even further to, do we have any constitutional, issues? And so the way elections are run has to be done by public funds. And so very well, this may not be allowable to have the parties do that, short of a potential amendment to our state constitution.
Other questions? Mr. Schoen, your testimony was the state constitution would, and maybe just remind the committee what our state constitution says when it comes to election law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Duncan, I was mentioning the Wyoming Constitution, and it just says that elections are to be provided by public funds. I don't have the citation in front of me. I do apologize.
No problem. Other questions for the state election director? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Schoen. Is anyone else here online or in person to testify on Senate File 142? Anyone online? I think there are 4 people on Senate File 142. All right, we will close public comment on Senate File 142. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Clausen, seconded by Hunt. Just because I heard both of them first. Committee, any amendments or discussion on Senate File 142? Not seeing any discussion, and Representative Blackburn has called the question. I do think it'd be interesting someday if political party if we did move to allow parties to have their own primaries. Especially, we had some talks 3 years ago about a presidential primary, and should we move from the caucus system to a primary election? Certainly one party was in favor of that. Apparently, you are raising your hand. It's great when I get text messages to tell me people are here to testify. I must have closed public comment too soon, Mr. Meyer. So my apologies if I missed you. If you have comments on Senate File 142. Senate File 142, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. I guess I want to just make a clarification on this particular bill. And I know that the Director of Elections as well as the Secretary of State will be taking some notes here, but I just want to make sure that given the fact that these guys work so hard on either the general or the primary elections, and I know that they're there late at night and whatever, this bill does not prohibit us from dropping off, a dozen or so pizzas and soft drinks and everything for the staff.
I believe, Mr. Mayor, it allows you can accept or expend private funds for meals or food provided in support, and that would be from any party, because I don't see that it specifies. Representative Duncan, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, but this says shall not apply to the Secretary of State when accepting. It doesn't talk about an education or providing on the election day of the poll workers and other election staff. So help me, because it's talking about education, subsection apply to meals and food provided or donated in support of the election training. So do we have to go through the Secretary of State in that way, or can we just do it directly to the poll workers and to the people? So I'm confused with Mr. Meyer as well.
Come on back, Senator Steinmetz. And so the bill, it looks like it goes to the governmental entity who's conducting the election, not necessarily the election workers. Would be if you want to go, buy them dinner, it doesn't quite prohibit it or explicitly exclude it. But Senator Steinmetz, thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your good work on the bill. If you need to tweak the language a little, we certainly understand. The Secretary of State was concerned that sometimes they accept some money or meals provided to their office. They always wanted that to run through the Secretary of State rather than through the county clerks. And the county clerks were not comfortable with that either if it was a monetary donation for a meal or something, which is why we talked about food for the folks on the day of the election, which taking the pizzas in while they're counting the vote would definitely qualify for that. And so that's the reason for that language.
Okay. And I believe Representative McGuire pointed out on line 5 of page 2, the word nor. So it does not apply for meals or food provided for election training or provided to poll workers or election staff on election day. Yeah. So I think we're good. Didn't want to cut you off, Mr. Meyer. Any other thoughts?
Nope, I just want to make sure we're able to support the people that are doing the work.
Okay. My apologies for missing your hand during public comment. Thank you for being with us. All right.
Chairman.
Still on the bill. Any further discussion or amendments, committee? Not seeing any in question being previously called. Barb, if you would call the roll on Senate File 142.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Ayer. Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Zwanitzer. 7 ayes, 2 noes, Mr. Chairman.
And Senator, I see you have both Representative Clausen and Hunt. If Representative Hunt will be floor managing the bill. He's getting the special blue folder as we speak. All right. Thank you, Senator. All right, committee. I did see the good President of the Senate come in. I believe Senate File 76 is the first on our list, if that would be okay, Senator. But if you want to do Senate File 152, which would be your pleasure to kick us off?
There we go. I'll take your lead on that, and filling in for the floor leader, Mr. Majority Floor Summers, he had to be at another meeting as well, but I worked with him on the task force, and so with that, if it'll be all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'll give you an overview and then we'll kind of step through the bill.
Of Senate File 76,
Yes.
Broadband Development Program.
Thank you, Mr.
Please
Chairman.
proceed.
So I bring you committee Senate File 76. And this is essentially one of the key recommendations that came out of some committee work to improve broadband across the state. We have access to high quality business and residential broadband. We have that. We have better business across the state. So that's why we decided to step in and try to refine it and see if we could help some people all across Wyoming. Broadband is essential to developing and growing, attracting businesses, improving academic performance, supporting healthcare, promoting innovation, and entrepreneurship, attracting investment, educating the workforce of the future, and just improving the quality of life in Wyoming. I kind of look at it as I hear the stories the first time in our little valley, they put in telephone service and what a difference that made. And now in our neck of the woods, we have high-speed internet, really high, but not everybody does across the state, folks, and that's what we're trying to fix here. So we had originally came out with Senate File 100. You'll recall that. That included creation of a broadband advisory council, broadband coordinator, a grant program to facilitate broadband development in the state. Now, Senate File 100 passed as Senate Enrolled Act 36, and it included the framework for a broadband development grant program with $10 million appropriation. It's put in place, but it wasn't used. And why is that? Folks, it was just too tight. There was too many things that tied it down when people were looking at trying to develop this in their area. And so we didn't see a lot of public-private partnerships. So last spring, the Management Council created the Broadband Task Force to examine ways to move the needle on the broadband infrastructure. We appointed a chairman, it was a good floor leader from the House who chaired that, did great work. And as part of the study, the task force worked with industry to provide updates to the broadband program created in 2018 with the hope of improving this grant program. Senate File 76 in front of you is at work. Senate File 76 creates a process to fund middle mile projects, update speed requirements, allows state agencies to partner on broadband proposals, streamlines the challenge process, eliminates the matching grant requirements, and adjusts the application process. So I'm going to work off of the floor leader's notes in the old bill and just tie them in to where they are under statute. If that'd be okay, Mr. Chairman, that way I can kind of highlight a little better what we're doing. And you have the gross bill in front of you. Under 92-1510, we're going to proceed with this broadband if there's no infrastructure already in place. In other words, we're going to walk over somebody's work that's already been done, but still, if we find an open area, we can take care of that middle mile project as noted in the title. The middle mile broadband project does not result in any overbuilt, and it also includes a last mile improvement ability if we need to. Like in some of our small communities, okay, we take care of the middle mile to get it there, but how do we take care of getting it into some of our very small communities? And that's where that's addressed. Under this agreement, the broadband provider agrees to provide the service at reasonable rates and provide the council's request and any marketing information to assist with those reasonable rates. Brought in an amendment during the process that allowed for economic diversification. And it also under 912-1501, the broadband development program was established. We added districts to the program because it's not just cities and towns. We actually have districts that are looking to improve with this service as well. Define what a state agency is. And we also under 9/12/1502, we defined what the application process was, how a district or town gets in and applies for this. We do the location and the mapping in this bill. And we address whether or not, if there's other providers out there, if they challenge it, what do they do? In other words, we're not trying to step in and work on projects that are already out there. And then under funding, under 9/12/1505, the council should give priority to applications that meet one or more of the criteria for funding. And that's the application process, are the projects that are economically and technologically feasible. Those are given consideration when we want to expand broadband. I know that's not the presentation I wanted to give you in accordance with your engrossed bill, but I was trying to tell you what we're trying to do and highlight. In our area, folks, we had a provider step in and apply for federal grants successfully, both early on and then with the additional CARES Act funding that came. And I can tell you the difference that makes when you have high-speed internet literally brought up in many cases to your home. They asked we have a 50-mile long valley. They already had approval for one end of the valley. They were ready to go there, but then the funding came through the CARES Act, and that had to be done by December 31st. So they asked one end of the valley to stand down for a year while they got everybody on one end of the valley set up with high-speed internet. And I'm telling you, that's very impressive. And now they can move to the other end of the valley next year. Not everyone has this opportunity, folks. And that's why we brought this bill, is to reach out, find our communities that need the help, not just for business, but for schools, for healthcare. It works. I checked in with my doctor using high-speed internet to talk to him this summer on a matter, and it works. It changes. This is, in my estimation, it's almost like the excitement of when we had telephone service taken to our rural areas and electricity to our rural areas. This is a game changer. This opens up business, schools, healthcare, everything. And that's why we worked on this. A lot of work went into this. I credit the good floor leader for his work. He put his heart and soul into this. So that, Mr. Chairman, that's 76.
And maybe I don't understand, who is the council that it keeps referring to? Is that the Wyoming Business Council, the Dane Dow Executive
Reference
Council?
them, yes.
It's the Wyoming Business Council who's the ultimate
Define
determine.
those grants. Yeah.
Questions committee on Senate File Senate File 76. Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I'm very much in favor of this. I was just wondering if you had just to help me out, what percentage of Wyoming is in need of this, roughly speaking?
Mr. Chairman, and I don't laugh at you, just about everybody. The main areas have it, but what we find, even in some of those areas, it's not up to where it should be, the level it should be. Tune in, and we saw this on Zoom as we met with as a legislature. You would think some areas have it, but people kept dropping out, and this takes care of it. It's I have that high-speed reference that I reference. I have that high-speed internet up to my house, and I live up on a dry farm next to a forest. And I could tell you the day we didn't have it, when we were trying to get it over the airwaves, and the day we had it pumped right into the house. Big difference.
Reverend Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, what are we, and maybe you said it and I missed it, forgive me, but the funds that are allocated currently in the, and I can't remember the name of the program, but the broadband program and the funds that we currently have,
Yeah.
are we wrapping that with the new
Now, Mr.
broadband
Chairman,
funds in together?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, as I
Senator
understand
Doxer.
it, those funds remain untouched. We still use it, but now it's more of a grant process. Our restrictions were so tight earlier, no one was interested in applying.
Correct.
We were trying to do good. Nobody was interested.
Funny how that works. Follow up?
So follow up.
Yep.
So, Mr. President, are we going to be able to somehow merge those or get rid of that program and merge them into this program? Or how are we going to make that better?
Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify that before I answer it. So,
Senator Doxer, clarify and answer.
I'm not sure that I have that exact answer. It was my understanding through the work that it stays there and we can still use it.
It's my understanding as well. Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Doxeter, can you just kind of walk through, you mentioned that there was a very successful program instituted in part of the valley that you live in. Who the provider was, who the public entity might be, and just walk through the actual process using some actual entities that may be interested in doing this. How that process worked.
Mr. Chairman, I won't mention the actual name, but our provider literally stepped up on their own and said, let's get this done. Does everybody have a provider that has a locally owned provider that has that kind of interest? Not necessarily, but there are. I was working with another small community prior to that and working with a provider trying to install some inspiration in them to say, step out and help this community. And at first they were a little bit hesitant because of the rules and regs of the regular funding that came in, but this changed it. Now they're going to go in and help this very small community because they were trying to establish a call center. And now this opens the door for that call center. But back to the area you're referencing, our provider on their own stepped out and reached for the first federal grant and got it taken care of. And then suddenly the CARES Act came in and the state was working with that. As you recall, in our special session, there was the deadline to December 31st. So they applied for that through the Business Council, it was approved for that. So they were funded for two separate projects. And they didn't want to lose one by waiting for equipment supplies. They already had all the laborers, all the equipment, everything lined up for what I call one end of the valley through one federal grant. But on the other end of the valley, they had a December 31st deadline to construct and be in the ground. So they just took all of that, moved it down and applied it to the new grant, took care of half a population of about 15,000. And then next summer, they'll take care of the other half of that population. I'll suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Iyer, that was probably the desire of the local provider to go get that done and get it accomplished for their customers. And there will take some of that. I know there's grants and there's money available, but at some point, some of our providers will have to step up and really pursue that.
Follow-up questions, committee. Seeing none at this time. Thank you very much, President Doxeter. We'll take some public comment. I see Ms. Zerga is in the room. Liz, are you here to testify on Senate File 76?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Certainly can. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz Zerga on behalf of the Wyoming Telecommunications Association. We are supportive of Senate File 76. We work closely with Mr. President and Majority Floor Leader and the members of the Broadband Legislative Task Force over the interim. A lot of work went into this bill. Very briefly, as the good Mr. President indicated, what this bill does is it creates one more option, tool in the toolbox, allowing the state grant program to fund middle mile projects. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with middle mile projects. Those are the projects that before you can reach an end user, you have to put in middle mile, which is often a length of fiber along a highway. There are areas of our state that it is cost prohibitive to put in the middle mile piece, but then once it's in, it allows carriers to reach the end users off of that middle mile. It's a great means of opening up internet that would not otherwise be available. The other thing that it does is that it allows us to partner with a state entity if we want to apply for grant funds, not limited to local government. So we could apply for state entity with a state entity. And it also streamlines the application process and the notice process, so it's not quite so cumbersome. And then in addition, it removes the matching requirement, which was an impediment for some local governments to get involved in this. They had to have matching funds. So I will attempt to answer some of the questions that I heard before. The question was, how much of Wyoming does this apply to? We don't have broadband mapping completed yet. However, I've seen various statistics prior to the CARES Act funding that was available for a very short period of time last year to get broadband out. I know there was testimony that approximately 20% or roughly 20% of the state did not have access to 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, which is the criteria for rural areas. After the CARES Act project funds were completed, my understanding from the Wyoming Business Council was that reached approximately 13,000 households and businesses. But there's still a substantial number of households and businesses out there that don't have access to 25.3. It's not economically viable. And we are supportive of this bill and of the broadband program, and we think these are improvements. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Zerga. You seem to have a couple. We'll start with the Representative Air.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Zerga, tell me if I'm correct in that when you're speaking about the middle mile, that usually involves the installation of fiber, and then the last mile is wireless service. Is that, can you kind of clarify that a little bit for me?
Ms. Zerga.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Iyer, so middle mile is almost always fiber. Last mile can be fiber, it can be copper, and it can be wireless. It could be any of the above. You connect to that middle mile fiber, oftentimes with fiber, pull it a little further, and then it may be wireless, or it could be fiber to the premise, or they could pull copper. These days, we don't do copper very much anymore. At least my rural carriers do not. They primarily do fiber. They will do wireless if it's cost prohibitive to get the fiber to the premise. But I will tell you that a lot of these projects that some members of the Wyoming Telecommunications Association did under the CARES Act last fall, those were fiber to the premise. They did middle mile and then fiber to the premise. In some cases, they used wireless for the last mile.
Follow up, go ahead.
Is the wireless, can it achieve the same type of performance as the fiber? Or at least close to as good?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Iyer, right now, the technology is such that they're developing the technology, and it's in process to get wireless to be able to give up to gigabit symmetrical speeds. I understand it can be done in the lab. I understand it can be done over very short distances. But right now, fiber is king. Fiber is what gets you gigabit symmetrical speeds. Wireless, not quite there yet. So no, with respect to these projects that were done, the wireless speed in some cases was very good, but it is not the same capabilities as fiber.
Could you quickly mention why in the bill we're cutting it from 1 gigabyte to 900 megabytes? Is that's an expansion, or I guess a greater flexibility and allowance in the current rules? Is there a certain community that's affecting, or apparently other people in the audience want to testify about that, but I thought I'd ask you if you had any thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, that was brought by cable, and I'll let cable speak to that.
Everyone likes cable. Hey, and one other thing, the word shapefile on page 9, line 6, a shapefile depicting the location and boundaries. I don't believe that's defined in law anywhere. And could you tell me what a shapefile is and if I need to define it in our statutes?
Mr. Chairman, shapefile is not defined in the statute. I don't think you need to do it. It's a term of art in this area, broadband. Everybody pretty much knows what they're talking about. It is an overlay map that shows basically your broadband capabilities in a given area, depending on the scale. So the scale can be all the way down to the household level, or it can be at a higher level, for a shapefile to show your coverage, your variance in your download and upload capabilities.
Okay, further questions, committee? For Ms. Zerga, not seeing any. Thank you very much for being here virtually, Liz.
Thank you so much.
Other people here to testify in 76, Mr. Gopian. Ms. Levin sat in the back of the room. So since you're closer to the front, floor is yours on Senate File 76.
Mr. Chairman, Nicholas Segopian, I represent Visionary Broadband. For those of you that don't know, Visionary is a Gillette-based internet service provider here in Wyoming and across the region, primarily wireless. But I think to Ms. Zerga's comment, fiber future-proofs some of the needs we have for broadband in the state. Today, my comments are very simple. We support passage of Senate File 76. It represents a great opportunity for the government, for the state of Wyoming to invest in broadband, and it does so in a way consistent with the Wyoming Constitution. The distinction between the Broadband Advisory Council and their $10 million grant program, excuse me, and the Connect Wyoming program, the biggest, and I think that's what Representative Duncan was referring to through the CARES Act funding in 2020, is generally the direct distribution of funds from the state to private individuals or private enterprise to make those investments on the ground. That was allowed as this body determined based on the nature of those federal funds coming to the state. The Broadband Advisory Council grant program itself envisions the full compliance with the Wyoming Constitution, and that's why you end up with having to partner with a local or state government to bring a project forward. And it really puts the impetus for bringing that broadband into the community on that local government. With that, I'd stand for any questions and would encourage your passage of the bill.
Questions for Mr. Gopian? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Levin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jody Levin here for Charter Communications. Charter stands in support of the bill. Not to reiterate any of the comments from the good president or my colleagues, this was an issue that was worked over the interim before the Broadband Task Force, and then additional amendments worked with President Dockstader and Majority Floor Leader Summers. I'd call your attention to 3 issues, one of which, Mr. Chairman, you already cued on, and that is on page 5, line 23, onto page 6, lines 1 and 2. This is the definition of business corridor. We are changing the speed definition to 935. That is because that is the speed definition, gig level service definition of cable. So keep in mind, this is a minimum speed definition. The speeds can go well above that amount. But the concern was, as drafted or as originally envisioned in Senate File 100, if you were at gig 100, effectively that would mean that all of Charter's footprint could be overbuilt. And this is a program that is aimed at trying to address the unserved areas of Wyoming. So you'd have at least this was Charter's contention, you'd have a hard time saying that a 935 speed should be overbuilt when there are areas of Wyoming that aren't anywhere close to that speed. So that was the first definitional issue that we worked over the interim. Also pages 9 through 10, you see a rulemaking that will occur through the Business Council with the Broadband Advisory Council. There was a concern that when you deliver items in your application, one of the requirements under current law is that you have financials, you also have a business plan. Well, this is a competitive industry, so there may be things in that business plan that you're happy to give to demonstrate why your project is worthy, but you don't necessarily want that information to be in your competitor's hands. So we said the best entity to deal with this really is the Business Council. This won't be anything new to them. They've addressed these confidentiality measures in other areas of their programs, but that was an important change that we felt was necessary. And then the last one is on page 11, line 14. You see the challenge process is being changed to 14 business days. Under current law, it is 30 calendar days. The task force felt like that was too long. They wanted to shorten the challenge process And the proposal coming out of the interim was really to look at 10 business days. Industry felt that that was a little too short, asked for a couple more days. President Dockstetter and Majority Floor Leader Summers were nice enough to say, how about 14? And industry said, we'll take it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we stand in support of the bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Representative Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5, did you say 935?
Ms. Levin?
Mr. Chairman, yes, at the bottom of page 5, line 23, changing the definition from 1 gigabit to 900 megabits, and then on to page 6, changing the speed from 100 megabits to 35 megabits. And that is because
Okay.
that's the definition of Charter's gig level service. And again, it goes well above that, but this is the minimum speed requirement.
Thank you.
Just double checking that doesn't impact any other provider. That's the minimum of your company's service, but you didn't hear any complaints from any other providers about those speed ratios?
Mr. Chairman, we did work with the other industry providers. I think there was a recognition that this is the definition for cable. Many of Ms. Zerga's clients are well above that speed because they are fiber-based. There was a question earlier about how middle mile is then delivered to last mile. In the cable world, it is fiber, and then it is fiber hybrid coax. So coaxial cable going into the household. Slight difference.
Any other questions? Representative Roscoe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levine, this may be a question for the president, but I'm just trying to figure out, because I think I might have one of these conditions where is it too remote to put all the money into a middle mile? Is that been defined at all? Maybe I did miss it. I'm not sure.
Ms. Levin,
Thank you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Roscoe, it's a very good question. And as Ms. Zerga indicated, we don't have mapping fully completed for Wyoming yet. A lot of credit needs to go to Mr. Kudera at our broadband coordinator. He's working hard to try to develop that map. But I'll tell you, there's quite a bit of Wyoming that is very remote, very expensive, and that's why you don't have service there today. The benefit of the federal CARES money through the Connect Wyoming program was that was money that could go direct to the provider. In some cases, it could even be 100% funded to help try to address these gaps in Wyoming. Under this program, of course, we have the constitutional requirements where you have to do this through a public-private partnership, and that immediately kind of limits exactly what we can do. So you want to keep those programs separate. To the greatest extent possible, we want to utilize Connect Wyoming. It will help fund these truly uneconomical places in the state.
But ultimately, the business council would have the authority of approving or limiting, saying that's just too expensive for that middle mile. I'm still working on this term middle mile. Is that used other places, or is that a new term of art for just Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, to your first point, you are correct. The Business Council, Broadband Advisory Council would have that discretion. Middle mile is well understood in the communications industry.
Been off corporations for 2 years and the world changes. Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Levin, how often would you anticipate that this challenge process might be invoked? Is that something that regularly happens, or would it be pretty rare?
Ms. Levin, your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ayer, I think you will see it. That's part of the reason why the shape file that is now a requirement of this program is so important, because industry really has a hard time knowing exactly where a project is proposed. So it may be, and this program, because of the lessons learned in the Connect Wyoming effort, there are amendments in this bill that allow the council to go in and ask the project applicant to modify their service proposal. Because what they might find is that a strip of it is actually served by another provider. And instead of kicking that out altogether, they can come back in and say, can you modify it to exclude this area? Then the rest of it would meet the definition of being unserved. I have seen some articles. I think others probably have seen articles as well, that there are some providers from the last round that felt they served an area, and there was no challenge process under Connect Wyoming. That wasn't my client, but I did see the articles in that regard. But I think we're putting the appropriate mechanisms in here for industry to be able to come in and say whether or not they serve an area. If it's served, arguably you want your funds to go somewhere else because you want to go address those gaps versus creating a government competition situation.
Further questions? Not seeing any from Ms. Levin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else here to testify on Senate File 76? Let me just check the waiting room one more time. Anyone in the waiting room? Mayor Siglin or YDOT not here for Senate File 76? All right, with that committee, we will close public comment on Senate File 76. What is your pleasure? Moved by Blackburn. Seconded by McGuire. Per second. See how quick that was. All right, committee, any discussion or amendments on Senate File 76? Representative McGuire, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question, and the good president may be able to help me with this faster. But I am looking at page number 11, and the chapter is 9/12/1504, talking about challenges. And if you go to page number 12, now unfortunately, it drops right to paragraph C, and it does not include paragraph B, which is always a challenge when you're trying to deal with these. I'm just curious, during the challenging process, I presume it was intentional to change the current challenge or the current, it looks to me like it was 18 months that the council could prohibit further work. And that's been bumped up to 5 years, which just seems like a long time. So I was just curious if the good president could address that and make sure that that's not it just seems like that would be a long time if we're trying to encourage business.
Senator Dockstetter, I think the question on page
Mr.
12.
Chairman, I'll be upfront with you. I don't recall the details on why that was moved out to 5, other than I vaguely recall that we were just trying to say, okay, don't keep coming back and challenging, let the work go forward. But I gotta be honest with you, I don't
Is your
remember
mic
the
on?
details.
I'm
Pardon?
sorry, is your mic on?
Yeah, yes.
Just hold it a little closer, thanks. Okay. Committee, any other questions or discussion on Senate File 76? Not seeing any further amendments or discussion and question being called. Barb, if you call the roll on Senate File 76.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air. Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
9 ayes, Mr. President. Or-
And then we can congratulate the president and Representative Summers will carry this in the House.
Yes,
far as you
thank
know.
you. And Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is a major, this is a big changer for Wyoming in terms of business, education, and health. We're moving Wyoming forward with this one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that's why I would give it to the president of the Senate, the majority floor leader of the House. Hey, but while you're here, Senator Dockstetter, we have a bill called Senate File 152, Connection of Utility Services, which your name is also on.
Thank you.
If you'd like to present that to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you 152 Connection Utility Services. And let me just state, and as I did for committee and floor work on this, I serve on a co-op board, member-owned co-op board that has these types of services, but I will tell the committee, this is not the genesis of the bill, nor do I make my income from this. It isn't my living. It's just simply based on trying to secure the products of Wyoming and keeping the associated jobs. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I bring you 152. The bill addresses a problem that in the early stages of what is appearing that could be a concerning matter across the country. And I would hope it wouldn't be for our state, but nonetheless, it felt like we had a need to put something in place. As infrastructure develops, there's a small but growing trend that puts fossil fuels by the wayside as part of the decision-making process for utility services in communities and across our state or across the nation as well. We don't need to have this happen in our state. So what we have here, members of the committee, is essentially you can call it a preemptive measure to help protect what's important to Wyoming, our mineral-based products. What Senate File 152 does is holds municipalities and counties accountable to those Wyoming products in terms of the services offered and the connection or reconnections of infrastructure. It's about striking a balance with the services that can be offered within our communities. The bill ensures that customers' choices will not be limited at any time, that they'll have the full choice. What this does is it helps keep energy prices and associated costs low with that choice, while at the same time allowing customers option choices. Folks, when I started to put this together, it looked like it fit in one part of the statute. But as I was meeting deadlines, I filed, and then we settled down and said perhaps it would fit better in cities and towns under that code, and county as well. So 15.1.132 and 18.2.116. Those are why we made those changes, because it was a better fit putting it under those titles 15 and 18. So we made that change, and that's why you see the engrossed bill still reaches out and accomplishes the same thing, but better refined. So, Mr. Chairman and Committee, I bring you 152 and the associated amendment that's blended into the engrossed bill. Essentially, in 15, we're enacting ordinances that keeps natural gas and propane in the mix. Under 18, the same as well for counties. I do have a little more to say on it, but with that, Mr. Chairman, Committee, I bring you 152.
Representative Duncan, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, President Dockstader, can you give me an example? I'm kind of confused on, my brain's going a little wild with my own interpretation of resolution that would prohibit connection and reconnection.
Mr.
So could
Chairman
you give me
and
an example?
Representative Duncan,
Sure.
for example,
Or Dr. Suter?
as we looked across the nation, there are literally towns and counties saying they're going to ban a natural gas service within their towns and saying, you can't have that as part of your product. And so it's a preemptive measure, so to speak, but that would be an example. If you had a town come in and say, no, we're not going to allow that. It's a mineral-based product. It's a fossil fuel. That's not part of the offering in our community. Yet we have infrastructure and so forth. I would say, and I'll mention this too in a moment, we have three states that have actually done these preemptive laws, and 13 states like us are considering them at the same time.
Representative Roscoe, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, just trying to figure out how the utilities responsibility on that. If the price were substantially lower to switch sources of energy, would that affect this, or would they have that option to do that?
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, we're just simply saying that they can have all options when offering their services. Prices will fluctuate on both sides. Could be higher on those that don't include a mineral-based product as well.
Yep, Reverend Duncan, I know you want to ask it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So two-part question, I guess. One is, what if the municipality doesn't have a say-so as the only source of power that they can elect to choose? They really don't have a choice. They only have one option and one choice. And so those decisions are made for them. That's the first question. The second is, what about those municipalities currently in our state, whether we agree or disagree, that are already gone to a renewable source and a non-mineral source? like, I think, is it Jackson area that's already hydro? And they're going to renewables as far as solar and wind as well. So what do we do about that?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative
Representative, not excluding that, just simply saying you can't exclude mineral-based product as well. That's, and full disclaimer, I'm part of the company that provides that hydro. And so it's all there. It's all being provided. Nothing's standing in their way. But they also, Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up, they also have natural gas services coming into that area out of the Jonah. So.
Okay, further questions for the Senator, Representative Bear.
I don't know if I have a question, more of a comment that maybe I can provide Representative Roscoe with a little clarification on his question. There's nothing in this bill that prohibits an individual consumer from electing a cheaper source of energy, whatever that might be. It just prohibits the city or the county from passing a resolution prohibiting any of these sources. So the individual still is free to do whatever is best in his financial interest to choose whichever source of energy he might want at his home. It would just prevent the city from enacting an ordinance disallowing any of these forms of energy.
Mr. Chairman,
Would
that's
you
a correct summary.
Okay. All right, we'll bring some public comment up. Thank you very much, Senator Dockstetter. People here to comment on Senate File 152, Mr. Bush. I was going to call you up even if you didn't want to comment, so I'm happy you're being proactive. And I'll probably have some questions.
My seat was getting hot, Mr. Chairman, so I'm happy to jump up. David Bush, Black Hills Energy. Senate File 152 is it's a bill that we've seen a couple different iterations in our service territories across the country. We represent or have operations in 7 different states. Well, 8, a little bit in Montana, but 7 different states that are primarily natural gas. Where this issue comes from, a lot of it is we've seen, for lack of a better term, activist communities that have decided that natural gas is, although it's cleaner than coal, it's still 50% carbon emission or 50% reduction from coal, but it's still carbon emissions. And that's bad. You may have heard the term electrification. Communities in states on the West Coast, states to the south of us, or cities to the south of us, have decided that electricity is the way to go with powering your home or heating your home. Specific kinds of electricity that do not come from carbon-based fuels. This bill doesn't deal with generation of electricity. This deals with the utility hookup to your home or your business. What we've seen in other communities is city councils have passed ordinances that say for any new construction of a building, whether it's a home or an office building, you can't put natural gas in there. It restricts choice. It restricts the opportunity for a cheap and readily available fuel for people. And I don't know of any commercial kitchens that want electric in their kitchen. Every restaurant I've ever been to is natural gas. With the storms that happened, I know there was a lot of people that used their natural gas stoves and their fireplaces to keep the heat on, even when their electricity was out. So it's really a measure that we think is important for allowing people to continue to decide what they want to choose in their home to fuel their home. If you want to go to all electric, you can certainly do that. You can put in all electric appliances, pull out all your gas-fired stuff and just go all electric. That's great. What we're trying to prevent is that lack of choice and the freedom to choose what you want to be removed by a city council or I assume a county commission. It seems for most of what we've seen in our other states, it's city councils that are really the ones that are doing it because they can't get, say, a renewable portfolio standard passed at the statewide level. So they go to, their community, the smaller community. Like I said, there's one to the south in the state to the south of us here that's done this. So, and for statistically, for us, we've got 120,000 roughly gas customers in the state of Wyoming, 432 employees as of the numbers I'm looking at here. and 57 communities served with gas. We also have electric here in Cheyenne. So it's still a priority for us, even though, there's a lot of electric utilities across the country that are in support of this because it knocks out the competition for them. But I think it's a good bill. It's a piece of legislation that we really support and would like the committee to move forward.
Okay, you want to go first, Representative Duncan? Then I'll have a host. Whatever you don't answer or ask, go ahead.
Since you brought it up, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Bush, you said it knocked out competition. So is this constitutional if you knock out competition within our statutes?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Duncan, so I believe it is. What we're doing is maintaining competition. We're allowing natural gas to continue to be available to people instead of a community outlawing one specific fuel, whether that's propane or natural gas or whatever else they choose. So in other states, I don't know if there's been any sort of constitutional challenges to that. Every state's different, I guess. But for us, I think looking at this, it really just maintains the ability for people to choose what fuel they want in their homes. And
So I guess my first concern is I'm worried that if the municipality says we don't want propane and you have to go all natural gas, they can't do that under this statute either. They have to allow either propane or, I know there's some cities in Wyoming that are all propane or primarily propane, but would this force a municipality and a utility in that matter to provide either natural gas or propane or have both options available to consumers?
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't think that's not the way I read it. I think I understand where you're going, but
yeah,
what it really does is says no, in that first section, no city or town shall enact or implement an ordinance that prohibits or has the effect of prohibiting the connection of electric, natural gas, propane, or any other. So whatever's available in your community would still be available. I don't read that as requiring us to bring natural gas to a community that maybe is just at propane. What it's saying is the town council can't pass a resolution that says, okay, we're electric and propane here. We're now banning propane because it is a fossil fuel. And we don't want those emissions. So we're going to go all electric for new construction or however they phrase that. So.
And I don't think any county has a specific agreement with the utility to provide power to the county, but many cities, including mine here, has I'm not sure what we call it, an exclusive agreement with a franchise with Black Hills in our case in Cheyenne. And I'm just worried that if they decided our city said, we don't, not that we would, but we don't want natural gas anymore, they would just not encourage, they wouldn't have to say it, they just would not franchise. And do you see any concern with, I'm just trying to get around when cities are basically franchising with specific public utilities, if they don't provide their own or have their own public utility. I'm trying to decide what my question is. I'm just concerned that those agreements, they just wouldn't renew, and would there be a cause of action from the utility alleging that it was the effect of prohibiting? I think I'm confident with a policy that prohibits. Policies that have the effect of prohibiting get a little murky to me. Any thoughts you want to provide on that?
Mr. Chairman, that I think I followed your line of thought there in your question.
There's a question somewhere.
I don't think so. If the city council were to come and say, we want to have green goals for our community, and we no longer want to have, and we we've identified natural gas as a fuel that we don't want to see put into new buildings or new homes. Existing homes would still have the need for that fuel and that connection. So if in our case, let's say our natural gas utility franchise is not renewed, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. And we just continue to serve electricity here. Another utility would be identified for serving the natural gas needs of the community to, keep those homes that already have the gas connection there. Because what this does say is basically no governmental entity can come in and just restrict that choice. I, as a consumer, would still be able to get natural gas. And I can assure you that if we were to lose the natural gas franchise here, there would be several others sweeping in to serve a community of 40,000 or so.
Okay. Representative Duncan?
60,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So using that analogy, it's a new subdivision, new area. They choose not to renew, hence not annexing gas to that area. They're not saying that they're banning it, but essentially they're banning it. So how does, they're not really getting around, I mean, they're getting around it. So how does this really stop them?
Mr. Bush, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, that is a good question. I'm not totally familiar with the annexation rules and things like that and how that would go. But if I would assume if a subdivision has decided that they want to build an area of homes that doesn't have natural gas connections and then market that to people that want to come live there, that's fine. Again, it's not a governmental entity that's saying you can't put natural gas in there. It is a group of people that would come together and say, we're going to build an area and just not have natural gas. We're just going to be all electric. And I think there's actually some neighborhoods that have done that across the country. So
Let me throw one more at you. And I'm not reading, I just want to make sure we're reading it the same way. When we say electric, there's no stipulation on where that electric power comes from, if it's solar or wind generated or carbon-based generated. And really either way, we have, let's say, a more environmental or liberal community saying we want to go all solar. And we have another community that says, that's a coal community that says we don't want any of our power from solar. And I know right now there's some agreements you can pay more, at least here in my utility, right? If you want green power, whatever the heck that means. There's nothing in this bill that specifies, could a city municipality still say, here is the type of electric power? Or do you read that in this bill? There's electric, just electric.
Mr. Chairman, I think electric is electric. Again, this is with utility connections and not on the generation side. I think if there was a community that wanted to, I guess, pass something that said we're going to have all of our electricity that is generated come from green power, which again, some communities have, I guess, that would be a different piece. That wouldn't be in here where we're talking about connections to a home, to a building, to a home or an office building.
In my mind, it would probably come the other way in Wyoming, that it would be all.
I would guess from being here for a few years now, I think that's a correct assumption.
Yeah. Okay. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Bush, wouldn't you agree? The real elephant in the room in all this is there's talk right now in our nation's capital of prohibiting the manufacture of household natural gas heating furnaces going forward. And so thereby federally taking out any new natural gas installations in houses, which if you live on either the east or the west coast is not that big a deal. But if you live here where it's really cold and windy and natural gas is far less expensive than electric, that's a big deal. That's the scary thing to me, at least. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Bush?
Would you agree, Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I would agree. I do believe there was some push at the congressional level to implement some of those policies that you're talking about. And I'm hoping that our congressional delegation and others will continue to push back on that. One quick aside to that, when I bought my first home 15 or so years ago now, one of the primary checks on the boxes, I guess, that my realtor wanted to assure that I had was natural gas forced air in my home because it was cheaper and more economical than electric baseboard heat. And I think there's some, again, this has become a movement of reducing the carbon footprint. And when you look at the numbers statistically, there's not much carbon footprint that comes from natural gas in homes and businesses. It's transportation and other things. So there are some that want to just do away with it all. And they see, again, they can't get it done at the state level. So they go to their local town council or whatever and try to get it done there. But I think I'll stop there and say, yes, I agree, Representative McGuire.
Further questions, for Mr. Bush, Black Hills Power. Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Ms. Bush, so basically this bill sort of ensures that the free market works. Is that right? The owner still has the choice of whatever he wants according to whatever price he can get. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is very good summation of, I think what we're trying to say here is we want people to choose what they want in their home, whether it's natural gas or electric or propane or wood fired or whatever they want to heat and power their home with, they're able to do that and not have somebody take that choice away from them.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Other people here to testify on Senate File 152, Mr. Taylor. Welcome to corporations.
Good to be back. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sean Taylor with the Rural Electric Association. In support of the bill, I'd agree with everything that Mr. Bush said and President Dockstader. As he mentioned, we do have one rural electric cooperative that also provides natural gas. And they did this because their membership asked for it. And so a little bit different take on it is we would be very concerned if a municipality were able to pass such an ordinance outlawing natural gas in that particular co-op, because we could end up with a lot of stranded investment. It was an investment that the co-op has made on behalf of their membership. And if that choice were to be taken away, we could have significant stranded investment up in that area. And so for that reason, we would support the bill.
And co-ops are defined as public utilities in Title 15?
Yes.
You know? They are.
Mr. Chairman.
Questions for the rural electric? Not today. All right. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Mayor Siglin, I see you're on. You are welcome to have the floor on Senate File 152.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yep.
I'm here to testify on 152. My objection to it is not necessarily against the context of the bill, but it goes to the taking away the local control. And, you know, we've, and every one of you have heard this argument before. We don't like when the feds tell us what to do. Well, sometimes us people in our towns and city councils and counties, we don't like what the legislature tells us what we have to do. So that is where I stand on this. I think it's better when it comes to instances like when you're dealing with utilities, and this was brought up before in another bill on the utility deposits and renters, but you know, it's better to let each town or each municipality or in each county deal on their own way, because one bill is not going to fit everybody. Even though this bill is a little bit more general where it might work across the state, it still takes away that local control. You know, and I'll use our town as an example here. Lingo, we're fortunate. We have our own electric here, but it is supplied by the Western Area Power Administration, and we belong to a cooperative called the Wyoming Municipal Power Association. Now, where that electricity is part of that generated by coal, oil, gas, even the windmills. I don't know. I don't care as long as we get good electric service. And that's what we have. In our town, we also have natural gas. And so I'm not against the context, like I say, of the bill. I'm just not sure taking away the local control is the best thing to do here. I know the good senator who sponsored this bill, he brought forth, that we're trying to keep our products, use Wyoming products, keep Wyoming people working, which refers to the natural gas fields and oil and coal. And I would like to see doing that, but things are changing, and they're not just changing today. They've been changing for a long time. And I'll make a real brief quote here from the CEO of Peabody Energy, who was Glenn Kello, I do believe. He said it wasn't the regulations that got the coal, and he's stated back in 2010 they started losing money. It was the competition, and the competition was oil and natural gas. So I believe that we should have a free market. Everybody should have a choice of what they want to serve. And last but not least, when I read this bill, and I'm not sure if I'm on the right page, or maybe I'm just not reading it right. You guys, it even says, hookups and reconnects and connections. Is this going to say on the cost? It doesn't say anywhere who's going to absorb these costs. Right now, we charge for a hookup and connection. I'm sure Black Hills, who supplies our natural gas, charge for a hookup and connection. Does this take this away? Because it says it preempts. It says you cannot deny it. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions from Mayor Siglin? I'm not seeing any, Mr. Mayor. Certainly appreciate you testifying today.
Thank you for having me, committee. Appreciate it.
County Commissioners Association. Welcome, Mr. Riemann. Senate File 152, floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association. I want to start by saying that we don't have a position on the bill, so I'm not coming at it from that perspective. But I did want to just make it abundantly clear, to the extent it hasn't been, that no county in this state has considered or is considering such a resolution or policy. And I think to take it a step further, we also question whether we would even have the power to do that. As you all know, we generate our power from you, and we have not been able to find where we would have that power. So from that perspective, we question why we're in the bill. Nonetheless, one question that does come up in my mind, having sat through this conversation, is whether this is intended to be directed at the private connection and reconnection of utility service. I think that's what we're trying to say here, is that my counties can't prohibit the connection of whatever electron is going to come into a particular home. A question I would have, though, is does it have more far-reaching implications to perhaps prohibit a county from saying we want only these electrons to come into our public facility? And certainly there may be some cases where the local electorate wants that to happen. They want, either carbon-based resources powering the swimming pool, or they want wind resources, depending on where they're at. I don't know. I'm just asking the question. I throw it out there. Again, we don't have a position on it or tracking it, but I'd stand for any questions.
And you've checked with Johnson, Niobrara, and Teton County? They're not affected? Because those seem to be the three counties that always come up before us, and corporations that have some issue, but they're all good right now?
Right, Mr. Chairman, in particular to Teton County, and the Senate President pointed this out. There is a natural gas pipeline that did come up through the canyons only, about a decade ago. Representative Roscoe can help me with that. And that community is pretty dependent on the hydro and that natural gas. So I think even to the extent that Teton County or Jackson would want to go in this direction, they're too integrated with those resources, and it just wouldn't work.
Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, now that you bring up part of my district, how do they, that's a really good question. How do they decide on how to heat the swimming pool? Wouldn't they probably just go with the most economic way to do that? I would assume.
Mr. Raymond, if you know how Jackson heats their swimming pool.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how each one of my counties heats the swimming pool or any of their facilities for that matter. I would just say, and if perhaps they're building a new facility and they want it to say, let's be LEED certified, and that demands a certain amount of resource, then they might enact a policy that they want X percent, or maybe it's 100% of the resource to come from somewhere. And I just want to make sure that this doesn't prohibit them if that's a local choice that they make for public facilities. I'm not talking about private facilities.
So overall, I mean, when I read the bill the first time, I assume it's a broad policy statement for all of the constituents. But your question is if it's actually a public owned facility in the county or the city, having them make a decision on how to best power that public facility or whatever facility under their dominion, this could come into play through a policy, not an ordinance, but a policy of here's how we're going to heat the swimming pool. There has to be options. I just want to make sure I get your testimony correct.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what I think I heard in the testimony is that we want to allow for consumer choice in this situation. And what I'm just expressing is if one of my counties wanted to say its electrons came from one particular source for a public facility, is that in and of itself for that one facility the prohibition that is contemplated under this? And I don't think that it's intended that way, but I want to make sure that it couldn't be construed by some individual that would be a prohibition, a resolution or policy.
Other questions for the county commissioners? Not seeing it this time. Thank you very much, Mr. Ruben. Anyone else here to testify on Senate File 152? Apparently not. All right, committee, we'll close public comment on Senate File 152. What's the committee's pleasure? Moved by Representative Ayers, seconded by Representative Blackburn. Representative Duncan, amendment or go for it.
Potentially. Help me out if this works. I'm thinking of an amendment on page 2, line 3, to add after utility to a private entity or residence. And again, on line 11, same thing.
Repeat that one more time. To a
To a
private.
private entity or residence, period. And if I can get a second, I'll explain.
Seconded by Hunt. Go ahead and
So
explain.
what we're hearing is a conflict between private and public. That if a public building wants to go solar or whatever to heat their swimming pool, versus the government entity shouldn't tell private residences or private businesses, you must use all electric or you must use all solar. So if we say that no county shall or city shall enact or implement any resolution or policy that prohibits or the effect of prohibiting, yada, 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 utility service provided by a public utility to a private entity or residence. So I think I'm pulling out and directing it directly to the private industry residents versus our public. Don't know if I achieved it, but I'm taking a stab.
I don't know if you achieved it. Let me ask you a question. So you're, so Wyoming attracts a trendy data, environmentally friendly data warehousing company that says we only want to be totally on, let's say, hydro or solar power, and we do not want you to even tell us we have to have a natural gas or propane hookup into our facility, we're 100% solar. I don't
The
know
entity's
this,
not telling them that they have to.
the city's not telling, well,
The city and the county cannot tell them that they have to be electric or solar. So the private industry, they can still do it,
as long as there's no policy in place.
right?
I think in my mind, it'd be easier just to take out the word policy and say you don't have any ordinances, which would affect everyone. But if we can go with. Well, the
I'm
amendment on the-
friendly, I'm a friendly. I just am trying to, I'm just trying to solve the conflict between public and private. Because I think the intent of the bill was public. I mean, private.
Yeah.
Private.
Representative Clausen on the amendment.
Not that the amendment isn't a good idea if you were concerned about that, but I think it's covered in the connection or reconnection. So the policy of which fuel to use would still be, I guess, silent, and I think the issue wouldn't be there.
It does clarify it on the connection or a reconnection. Okay, another discussion on the amendment committee. Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think it clarifies it a bit. Thank you.
And Barb, you have the amendment after utility to a public entity, to a private entity or residence. And you want that reflected on both the city and the county lines, Representative Duncan? Okay, just making sure. Same wording on line 11 after utility. Mhm. Yep. And I'm not sure if we have the word private entity defined in statute is my only concern. Okay. For the testimony on the amendment, Representative Blackburn.
Mr. Chairman, I'm kind of leaning towards Representative Clausen's thoughts about that. I think we're covered both ways.
Okay. Further testimony? Question on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. All those opposed? And that amendment has failed. We're back on the bill on Senate File 152. Representative Bear, go ahead.
Thank you. On that same line, page 2, line 3, after public, insert a comma, and then municipality or cooperative utility, just to make sure that it includes all types of utility providers.
Let's did it one more time on line 3 after public,
But in a
insert.
comma, municipality, comma, or cooperative, comma, or not comma, but our cooperative utility.
So Barb, yeah, on after public, it'd be provided by a public, comma, municipal, comma, or co-op utility,
Yeah, cooperative.
cooperative. It should be cooperative.
Yes.
And similar on the same part on line 11 after the word public. So not just public utilities, but we're including municipal utility, municipal electric generators and co-ops, cooperatives. I need to start learning to say that whole word.
Right.
Yep. Is there a second on that? Second by Clausen. Discussion on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you. So aren't we covered there when it talks about line 1, the connection or reconnection of electric, natural gas, propane, or other energy utility service?
The way I read it. a
Most
public-
towns,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was thinking most municipalities don't use co-ops. I might be mistaken. Mr. Taylor's here, so he could answer that for me.
I think Mr. Taylor testified that
Munis-
co-ops are public utilities. So it just kind of further delineates. It
So
also
that-
adds municipal
And there are some
self-generate, yeah.
utility services provided by municipalities. And it just clarifies, I agree that co-ops are public utility as well, but it clarifies to make sure they're not included.
So
I
we
don't
don't
think
need
it
co-op.
changes the intent. I mean, I think it's covered, but it is now specifically
Clarifies it a
covered,
little better.
clarifies it. Further discussion on that amendment. And Barb, you're good on lines 3 and line 11? Same wording? Yep. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment is passed. Further discussion or amendments on the bill? Question,
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Roscoe.
can I expound a little bit? Just because I think this, I wasn't clear on this bill to begin with, but I think it does allows for the free market to work. I don't think it's trying to tell anybody they can't do anything here. And I think if one thing we haven't brought up is if a community is worried about climate change and that those decisions will be made by national or state, decisions on maybe a carbon tax or something like that. But I think that this keeps the free market open, and so I'm in favor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further testimony or question or amendments? Seeing none and question being called. Barb, if you would call the roll on Senate File 152.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air.
Aye.
Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Zwanitzer. 9 ayes. Do pass with amendments.
And Senator Dockstader, do you know who the floor manager in the House is of this bill? Representative Air, is that correct? You're taking it? Okay. Thank you very much for hanging out with us for your lunch hour.
You probably don't want me. I'm gonna kiss death.
I'm sure we'll help him out. So committee, we do have time because we're out till 2:30 to do. Yeah, we're not going anywhere. Get comfy. Senate File 112, although I don't see Senator Landon, but it's my understanding that Mr. Rossetti from YDOT agreed to be a backup. So let me wait for him to enter the room. So, Mr. Rossetti, I was informed that if Senator Landon didn't show up, you may be agreeable to discussing Senate File 112 to the Corporations Committee. Would that be a correct statement?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go with that, sir.
Okay, it doesn't look to be too complicated, so perhaps you could just tell us what 2614-105C is, and we could deduce the rest from there, but you have the floor.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for YDOT. 2614-105C is part of the insurance code that pulls in the Department of Transportation. And this is a specific discount required to be offered by insurers to individuals over the age of 55. The rationale behind the bill here, sir, was we were asked a question as to why we do not allow online training for this discount. As read right now, this requirement is that be classroom and driving instruction. As we looked into it, sir, the department did not feel like we had any reason to be involved here. And I do not want to speak for the insurance department, but as we were talking to them, this seemed like the elimination of this requirement made more sense because it allowed that relationship to be established between the insurer and the insuree. And then neither state department would be dictating to an insurer what they have to do related to discounts on insurance related to a class that folks take. Hopefully that helps clear it up, sir, but I'd stand for any questions you may have.
And so just for the edification of the committee, originally the bill before it was engrossed actually went into the section and took out basically what YDOT would approve and the minimum number of hours which YDOT would approve. And after reading it, the Senate just repealed the whole section in line with what Mr. Rossetti said. So if you have any questions on that, certainly you can ask Mr. Rossetti. We also do have the insurance commissioner as well in a second. Any questions for YDOT? And I believe Melissa's online just in case as well. If she has any additional comments, she can certainly turn on her camera. But seeing no questions for you, Mr. Rossetti, thank you for hanging out with us for a couple of hours to give us 2 minutes testimony. Certainly
Thank you,
appreciate
sir.
it. Mr. Rude, I'm not sure if you can join us or not, but if you are online, you are. Welcome, Jeff. Any comments on Senate File 112?
Mr. Chairman, Jeff Root from the Department of Insurance. No real comments. I was here to answer questions. I appreciate the foresight of a former commissioner to get WIDOT to do all the work with something that was buried in the insurance code. But looking at it, I really don't see a need for us or either of our agencies to oversee and mandate something like this. Neither of us is in a good position to decide which course would be a good course to help someone over 55 be a better driver.
Okay, any questions for the insurance department? Not seeing any either. Thank you as well, Mr. Root, for hanging out for a couple of hours. We look forward to a lot of time in the interim together. With that, public comment on Senate File 112 from members of the audience. Ms. Wilkinson, what brings you to corporations today? Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Wilkinson, here today on behalf of American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. Briefly, Mr. Chairman, we do stand in support of the bill. We do think that it's a good little bill, and we appreciate the work of the department on it and would be happy to answer any questions. But basically, we think that it is something that should be between companies and their insured and insurers to decide what discounts should apply. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You don't want government mandates to help tell you how to price insurance? Really?
Not in this area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, for Ms. Wilkinson? Seeing none. Thank you. Other public comment from people in the back? Just here to watch the process at work, and we are entertaining over the lunch hour, let me tell you. Not seeing anyone online to testify on Senate File 112. We can close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on Senate File 112? Moved by Blackburn, seconded by McGuire. Any amendments? Any discussion? All right, seeing none and question being called. I could have put a fifth bill up today, committee, my apologies. Barb, if you'd call the roll on Senate File 112.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air.
Aye.
Representative Hunt left an absentee vote of aye. Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Roscoe. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Aye.
9 ayes.
Committee, unless I hear, do you want it, Representative McGuire? Keep your senator happy? I like it. Committee, we do have, I believe, 2 other bills, one of which is a corporation's interim committee bill that we'll be hearing Wednesday. Then I have 1 other on motor vehicles as well. So I think 2 bills up on Wednesday. We are going to have interim topics with our Senate counterparts on Thursday. I believe Thursday morning, Barb, is it 8 or 9? At 8 o'clock across the hall. And so if you guys, anyone in the committee does have thoughts for interim topics, they were emailed to you on Friday. If anyone does have last minute additions they want to discuss, certainly let me or Chairman Driscoll know. Likewise, if there are any places in Wyoming you want to have a corporation's interim meeting this year that relate to the topics we'll be discussing, not counting the likely 10 to 14 meetings we'll have in September through November on redistricting, please let me know. I know we were going to have a meeting in the Bridger Valley last year, Representative Air, before COVID went online. So if it's okay, we will probably request 1 meeting down in that part of the state. Only, I'm sure my co-chairman would like 1 meeting in Crook County. So we'll be traveling. Casper's right in the middle for 3 meetings. So with that committee, I think I did request if any of you have specific dates you cannot make an interim meeting before September, certainly let me know. And you can give them to me right now. Co-chairman Driscoll and I should have by Thursday the 3 meetings for the interim for corporations. We may tack on a day of redistricting and have a 3-day meeting, or we may do redistricting completely separate. We're still talking with the federal government about when The numbers are going to be available. There's some belief now that the number countywide data may become available in June or July. So we could get, if we know how many people are in each county, we could decide, we could do some initial determinations and then where we need to potentially visit. All right, with that, we will adjourn our meeting today and see you. I have the minerals dates down and all other committees that you shall serve on. About half have already scheduled, so I'll not overlap anyone. With that, we're adjourned until Wednesday.